We already saw that orders were getting more prominent presence in OverDress, but after today, that's been taken to a whole new level.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today it's Tuesday, which means it's of course time for the weekly dose of Vanguard OverDress news. And today we've got a lot, as Bushiroad not only revealed the very first reveals of the very first core main booster set of Cardfight Vanguard OverDress, but they released a brand new archetype, a brand new mechanic, as well as a brand new Sentinel type. So that means we have a lot to cover and a lot to talk about. And this new archetype will revolve mainly around order cards, and it's also the second archetype of the Stoicheia Nation, which is being referred to by the community as the Grand Blue deck. We already saw the Great Nature playstyle with the starter deck, so now we're gonna take a look at what the Grand Blue playstyle has in store for Stoicheia. And keep in mind, all these cards can be used in premium with Great Nature, Neo Nectar, Aquaforce, Grand Blue, as well as Mega Conley. So there might be extra synergies there once we go over these card reveals themselves. So with that out of the way, let's start off with the new Grade 1, which will also be the main right deck target for this new playstyle, as we've got Rancor Chain. And Rancor Chain has the abilities: act on Vanguard Circle, once a turn, cost Soul Blast 1, draw 2 cards, choose up to 1 order card from your hand, discard it, and if you did not discard, choose 2 cards from your hand and discard them. So effectively, this is basically a Pot of Greed that costs you a Soul Blast to activate it, as long as you can of course discard an order card. And this is where we start see the first seeds that's been sown for the order card mechanic. Now, in general sense, this is actually really good, and having an order card in your opening hand or in the first couple of cards is actually quite doable, as you can mulligan your entire hand and you will run quite a few amount of order cards in this deck. So this is actually pretty decent. But in the premium aspect, you don't mind potentially just discarding 2 cards, because this is effectively a cycle 2 for a Soul Blast, which is actually really good. And in Grand Blue type, this is basically milling, but now you can selectively mill your cards because you first draw them and then you send 2 cards to the drop zone, which is way better than just blindly milling cards. So that is already a really good card in general sense, and for the deck itself in OverDress, it looks to be a very solid card. But then we also have an extra thing on top, which is Continuous Vanguard Circle. If you played an order this turn, this unit gets power plus 2k. So we can immediately see that this deck heavily focused around playing and using order cards, not only for its first ability, but also by actively playing the card and boosting your field up as it becomes a 10k power unit onto the board, which is fine. But let's take a look at the Grade 2, where we suddenly can see more synergies. Because for the Grade 2, we have Black Tears Husk Dragon, and it has the abilities: although when this unit is placed on the Vanguard Circle, choose up to 1 normal order from your drop and put it into your hand. So if we combine it with the Grade 1, now we actively plus out of the skill, and it is actually a +2 for a Soul Blast, because the order card that we discard next turn, we're going to immediately get it back and potentially can play it on that particular turn, which is actually really good. But then it also has the ability Continuous Vanguard Circle. If you played an order this turn, this unit gets power plus 5k. So this becomes a 15k attacker, and the Grade 1 becomes a 10k attacker or booster. So if you have them in one column, just by playing an order, you power up the column from an 80k column to a 25k column, and it doesn't cost you any extra resources. So that's a nice extra bit of power buff to your field, and it can be to multiple columns, so that can actually ramp up a lot of power numbers by just playing an order card, which you probably want to do in this deck. So overall, for me, this is actually a pretty nice card, and will definitely be the focus for the right deck out of this set. Now let's take a look at some order cards they revealed to understand the potential of these 2 new cards before we go over the main boss unit. And first off, we have the Monster Reborn of the deck, which is Spiritual Body Condensation. And this order card has the ability: play this with cost Soul Blast 1, Choose a card with a grade equal to or less than your Vanguard from your drop, call to the Rancor circle, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So basically, for Soul Blast, you can revive any card from the drop zone. It's a nice ability that just can help you to set up your board, and the extra 5k power can help you to beef off your numbers. Now this synergizes really nicely with the grade 1 and grade 2, because they also get extra power by activating an order card, but if you target one of those cards from your drop zone, they gain even more power because they gain a 5k of this order and then immediately their own effect, so you actually start to ramp up some decent attackers in the process. Now, so far this doesn't really sound as amazing because we don't see really good targets because these are the only reveals that we've got. But we could potentially combine this with maybe with some of the cards from the Great Nature playstyle to start a deck. We have some back row attacker potential maybe. But also in Premium, now we can give drop zone revive effects to clans like Aquaforce, Great Nature, Neonectar, and Mega Colony. I don't know what the implications of that is, but it could be crazy for some decks. So this is actually really interesting that we see a card like this that's really generic. But if we go back to OverDress, let's take a look at the other order card, as we got a second one, which is Grief, Despair, and Rejection. And I haven't really touched upon this with the other cards, but I have to say the artwork on these cards look pretty damn sick. Like, this isn't really something we have seen in Vanguard as much, as most of the cards are very colorful and bright, but this and the other cards, even the grade 2, look very dark and grimy and very goth metal, if I have to explain it to some extent. So and I really like this pattern. But what I also really like about this card is the ability it has, because its ability is play this with cost Counterblast 1, which basically means we have an order card that costs a soul or a Counterblast, which is nice if we are paired up against the Brandgate deck. But the effect is if your Vanguard is Mysterious Rain, Spiritualist, Zorga, that's the new grade 3, choose 3 of your units, and they get power plus 10k until the end of turn. You can basically power up your entire front row with an extra 10k. It's effectively the Persona right that you can activate whenever you want if you have this card in your drop zone or in your hand, because you can of course fetch it from the drop zone, which is really nice. But also what's really good is that you are flexible in a way that you can distribute the power, because you can also stack the power on one column if you know your opponent could potentially stack defensive triggers, or you already have an attack that can hit good enough that you don't need the extra power, so you want to give that to something else, or you want to power up your center column to force your opponent to waste a lot of shield if you know they don't have a perfect guard in their hand. So this card opens up options in the way that you want to utilize the power distribution, which is really good. And of course, keep in mind, order cards can only be used once a turn in general. So you can only activate one order card per turn. So you have to choose if you want to activate this card, or you want to revive a unit from the drop zone if you want to use the grade 1 reborn card. And that can be annoying in certain aspects, especially in a deck or an archetype that heavily relies or revolves around order cards. Luckily for you, or for us, depending on who's going to play this deck, Bushiroad got your back, because they found a way around this annoying situation with the new boss unit for this deck. Say hello to Mysterious Rain Spiritualist Zorga. And the reason why this card fixes that problem is because of his first effect, which is Continuous on Vanguard Circle. When you would play a normal order, you can bind a normal order with a different card name from your drop and Alchemagic. What is Alchemagic, you might ask? Well, in very simple terms, you can combine the cost and add the effect of the order card that you bound to the back of the order card that you play. Now you might have some question of what does that exactly mean? Well, to clarify what it actually means, it basically allows you to play 2 order cards at the same time, from which one of those order cards is the one that you bound from the drop zone. So to really clarify that, here's a graph that they released at the same time, and here we can see it in action how it actually works. So first, when you play a normal order card, and they specifically state it has to be normal order card so it doesn't interact with blitz orders, you can bind another normal order card from your drop zone. But keep in mind, they have to be 2 different names. So there have to be different order cards. You cannot double up on the same order if you play one from hand and then the exact same from drop zone. You cannot do that. And then what then happens is that you basically combine those 2 orders together. So you pay the cost for both orders and then you resolve both effects. And that means with this card, you could then use the Reborn effect as well as the grade 3 order that allows you to put 3 times 10k power onto the board. And that is then where we see the actual value of this card and this mechanic. But of course, you might have some extra questions about this Alchemagic mechanic. So they also answered some questions like they usually do with these new mechanics. So let's go over those questions very fast before we actually start analyzing this particular card and its effects. So the first question they ask: when Mysterious Rain Spiritualist Zorga is not on the field, can you Alchemagic? No, you cannot. Alchemagic can only be used when the skill of Mysterious Rain Spiritualist Zorga is active. So very easy to explain, it is his skill. So you cannot use this mechanic if he's not on the board because it's his skill. It's not something like Striding in Jira where that mechanic is generic to any grade 3 or basically to the stride units in your G-zone. This skill is of Zorga. So maybe we get future grade 3s that have that mechanic as well, or it's gonna be exclusive to him, so you have to keep him as your boss unit to be able to do this. Then for the second question, if you use Alchemagic, will it be regarded as playing an order card twice? No, it will not. An order card can only be played once. The cost and effect of the order card bound is added. So it's still the same ruling. You play the order card from your hand, and then what you basically do is you add the effect and the cost of the other order card to the order card that you're playing. So effectively you're still playing one order card, but it's now 2 effects in one. So you basically are transmuting that thing into a giant order card. That's basically what you're doing. Hence the Alchemagic part of it. Now as for the final question, this basically to clarify the steps and of the process of doing this. When using Alchemagic, how should the process of binding an order card, playing the cost, paying the cost for the 2 order cards and the 2 effects be resolved? Please follow the steps shown below. First step, specify that you're playing a normal order from hand. Step 2, at that moment, bind a normal order from your drop. Step 3, pay the cost for both the normal order played from hand and the normal order bound. Step 4, resolve the effects of the normal order played from hand, then the normal order bound. Step 5, profit. So this is basically what you would assume is how this will resolve. The only important thing that we can take from this is that the steps in which order you resolve which effect is basically the first one that you originally was playing, and then you resolve the second one, which is actually really important because let's say for example you play the Reborn card from hand and then you have Alchemagic, the power card, the grade 3 that allows you to put power onto the board. In that way, you can first Reborn the card and then potentially give that Reborn card the extra 10k power. But if you have the grade 3 order in your hand and then you Alchemagic the grade 1 Reborn card from the drop zone, you cannot do that. You first need to put the power onto the board and then you place the new card onto the field, thus not being able to give the power to that new unit onto the board. So in hindsight, it makes sense, but this does have implications of potential playstyles or mechanics or interaction and combo plays because of the way that you resolve them in a specific order. So keep that in mind when you're using this mechanic. Now, with that said, we of course have another effect on Zorga because that's what we all have just been talking about, has been his Alchemagic effect. His second effect is basically the same as the Reborn order card, as its act on Vanguard circle once per turn, cost counted as 1, choose a card from your drop zone and call to the rearguard circle. So it basically allows you to swarm the board turn after turn, which is basically very Grand Blue-esque. The main appeal of this card is of course his Alchemagic ability. Now I already explained about the implications of the specific order that you need to resolve those orders, which is kind of confusing as we're talking about order cards and the order of resolving things, but it doesn't matter. But that is really important here, and it will probably have impact in which type of order cards you would and wouldn't play, which is really interesting if I'm gonna be honest. But there is something else that some people probably are overlooking and what type of implications this effect has. This isn't solely just being able to resolve 2 orders every single turn. It is also a recursive effect of set orders. Because normally when you play an order card, they go to the drop zone, and most decks, most archetypes, they cannot reuse those effects. Now in this deck, you can use those order cards, it goes to drop zone, and thanks to Zorga, you can reactivate that same order card. So you don't necessarily have to keep drawing in new copies of that order card to use the effect. So to give a good example, in the early game, you can use the Grade 1 order card to just reborn some units onto the board to be a bit more aggressive. But then on your Grade 3 turn, you can reuse that reborn effect once again the moment that you activate a different order card, thus gaining more value out of that particular order card. And that is something that gives you even more value on top of what you already are doing. That is already an extra bonus for any other archetype that can only use order cards their normal typical way. And it also negates the problem of order cards themselves, because there's one issue with order cards, and that's the fact that they have a hidden cost. Every order card, besides the cost printed on the card itself, has the inherent discard cost because you lose the card from hand. Because this card can activate those order cards from the drop zone instead of from your hand, it negates that discard cost that's basically a hidden cost on the order card, which is actually incredibly good, because that reborn card in your hand is basically a 1-for-1 trade, as you lose a card from hand to gain a card onto the field. But if you activate that reborn card from the drop zone, it's no longer a 1-for-1 trade, it's actually a plus because you didn't sacrifice a card from your hand to activate that reborn effect. So there's actually a lot of interesting implications that this card is bringing to not only Stoicheia or Grand Blue, you could say per se. It basically brings a whole new dimension to order cards, as it circumvents some issues they naturally have, which is actually really interesting. So I'm very excited and very curious of the potential of this card in the future, because with more order cards on the horizon, this card will only become better and better. But of course, that wasn't the only thing that Bushiroad revealed today, because there's one more thing that they showed to us, and that's the brand new Sentinel types, because they revealed this new interesting Grade 1 Sentinel card. And here we have the one that's leading the charts, and we've got the Dragon Empire version called Twin Buckler Dragon. And it of course has the continuous Sentinel keyword, but his unique ability is auto. When this unit is put on the Guardian Circle, choose one of your units and it cannot be hit until the end of the battle. If your hand has 2 or more cards, choose a card from your hand and discard it. So where every other normal Sentinel card has the inherent cost of discarding a card to activate that effect, this card can just activate, and then afterwards it's going to check if you need to discard a card. This basically means you could potentially have a 1 card perfect guard, and this works when you have 1 card in hand or when you have 2 cards in hand when you use it, because if you have 2 cards in hand and you call it, you have only 1 card in hand after it's going to check, means you don't have to discard. So if your last cards in hand are actually 2 copies of this PG, you can stop 2 attacks, which in the past was impossible because you needed to discard the other PG for one of the PGs that you want to resolve, which is a really interesting design approach that they take, because it rewards certain way of guarding, because in the past you usually want to perfect guard immediately one of the high attacks and then guard the rest that you need to, but now maybe you want to first guard with actual multiple cards, so then you can get this perfect guard as a 1 card guard, so you are somewhat rewarded for a different way of guarding from your hand, which opens up a very interesting way of guarding attacks. Now in Premium, this opens up the floodgates for even more options in deck building, because now we have even another option for Sentinels, because we have this type of perfect guard, we have the typical perfect guard, we have the Grade 1 perfect guard that we can write and discard and cycle effectively, we have the countercharge perfect guard, we have the draw PGs, we have the crit Sentinels, and this is basically another layer on top of that, which opens up even more interesting options. Now, speaking of Premium, however, there's one card that absolutely benefits of this effect, and that is Dragonic Overlord the Cross V Edition. Because basically, with his continuous ability, you can always 1 card perfect guard, because it always registers your hand as being 0 cards, which is kind of ridiculous because that deck didn't need even more defensive options. So yeah, that's a thing. But other than that, of course, Dragon Empire isn't the only one that's going to get this, because every nation is going to get a copy of this type of Sentinel, as we see here in this picture. And for some reason, everyone is a dragon, except Cater Sanctuary, because they had to have a horse for some reason, but fine, whatever. And another interesting detail about these Vanguards is that they're all rares, which means they're gonna be super cheap. So that's actually pretty nice, instead of the double R treatment that we had with the draw RPGs in OverDress. And with that, we basically conclude all the new news that we got today. And there was a lot, if I'm gonna be very honest, because we got a whole new archetype and a whole new playstyle, including the right deck for this new Stoicheia archetype. And we got a new type of Sentinel, which opens up the floodgates for even more potential defensive options. And this isn't even everything yet, because they also revealed what's gonna happen next week. And apparently next week we're gonna get even more crazier amount of news, because they're not gonna reveal one new archetype, they're gonna reveal 2 new archetypes for the main booster set. One for Cater Sanctuary and one for Dark States. And they look to be like we're gonna get a Dark Irregulars-like unit, which is the main grade 3 what we see here, and some kind of Oracle Think Tank Magus-like unit for Cater Sanctuary, which opens up a very interesting option for the starter deck, which I will probably go over in a future video. But with that said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought of these new reveals. I am very excited for what we got for Stoicheia. Not necessarily what we got right now with these reveals, but more importantly, the implications of the grade 3 with this whole Alchemy Magic mechanic and the implications have on the order card mechanic itself. So I'm very curious of what the future holds for that deck and for future card design. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.